The mid-90s, a golden age for PC gaming when the first-person shooter genre was practically exploding onto the scene. By 1996, gamers had already been mesmerized by Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. But then, along came Duke Nukem 3D, a game that swaggered onto the stage with a cigar in its mouth, a pair of sunglasses, and an unapologetic attitude that changed the FPS landscape forever. Duke Nukem 3D wasn't just another shooter, it was a pop culture parody wrapped in explosive action. This was the title that took Duke Nukem, a relatively obscure protagonist from two earlier 2D platformers, and turned him into one of the most recognizable and controversial mascots of the 90s. The game had it all: over-the-top violence, a cheeky sense of humor, and a fully interactive world that felt alive. From smashing arcade machines to flipping light switches, Duke Nukem 3D invited players to explore and play with their environment in a way that most shooters of the time simply didn't. But let's not gloss over what made this game divisive. Duke Nukem 3D wasn't just edgy, it gleefully dived into territory that had parents and politicians clutching their pearls. The game's use of sexual humor, gritty themes, and copious amounts of gore made it a lightning rod for controversy. Yet, love it or hate it, Duke Nukem 3D pushed the boundaries of what gaming could say and do, cementing its place as a cultural artifact of the 90s. If there's one thing Duke Nukem 3D proved, it's that sometimes a game doesn't need a deep or overly complex narrative to capture the imagination of its players. The story is simple, but its simplicity works in tandem with Duke's brash personality and the chaotic world he inhabits. Set in a not-so-distant future where Earth is under siege by alien invaders, the game kicks off with Duke returning to Earth after his spacefaring adventures in Duke Nukem 2. As Duke touches down in Los Angeles, he quickly discovers that the city is in ruins, overrun by grotesque aliens who've not only decimated the infrastructure but also abducted Earth's women. And let's not sugarcoat it, rescuing the women is a huge motivator for Duke, with the game reveling in its over-the-top, tongue-in-cheek approach to machismo. While the overarching narrative is straightforward, Duke Nukem 3D excels in delivering its story through environmental storytelling and Duke's larger-than-life character. The game's humor, combined with its knack for referencing everything from Hollywood blockbusters to cheesy sci-fi tropes, makes its plot memorable without being overly serious. At its core, it's not about intricate storytelling. It's about giving players an excuse to blow stuff up, take on iconic enemies, and laugh at Duke's unrelenting bravado. The gameplay of Duke Nukem 3D is where the game truly flexes its muscles, delivering a chaotic, fast-paced, and unapologetically fun experience that set it apart from its FPS contemporaries. Built on Ken Silverman's build engine, the game offered a level of interactivity and exploration that was groundbreaking for its time, marrying brutal combat with environmental immersion in a way that still feels fresh decades later. At its core, the gameplay revolves around the classic first-person shooter formula of blasting through waves of enemies, finding keycards, and navigating maze-like levels to reach the exit. However, what sets Duke Nukem 3D apart is its dynamic mix of action, exploration, and humor. The levels aren't just corridors filled with enemies, they're sprawling, open-ended playgrounds designed to encourage curiosity and experimentation. From urban environments like seedy back alleys and neon-lit clubs to alien-infested space stations, the game's variety of locales keeps the action feeling fresh and exciting. Interactivity was one of Duke Nukem 3D's standout features. Players could shoot out lights to darken a room, break mirrors, flush toilets, and even play arcade machines. This level of environmental engagement wasn't just a novelty, it made the world feel alive and reactive, pulling players deeper into the experience. Duke's arsenal was a thing of beauty, offering a mix of traditional weapons and wild, over-the-top tools of destruction. You had your standard pistol and shotgun for straightforward firepower, but then came the pipe bombs, trip mines, and the fan-favorite shrink ray, which allowed players to reduce enemies to pint-sized pests before stomping them into the ground. This inventive arsenal encouraged players to think creatively about how to dispatch foes, making combat as strategic as it was chaotic. Let's talk enemies. Duke Nukem 3D threw a variety of alien adversaries at players, each with unique behaviors and attack patterns. The pig cops, mutated enforcers dressed as police, became iconic villains in their own right, perfectly embodying the game's absurd sense of humor. Flying drones, octobrains, and alien bosses added plenty of challenge, ensuring players had to stay on their toes. What kept the gameplay compelling across the board was its pacing. Levels were designed to keep players moving, balancing moments of exploration with intense firefights and sudden ambushes. The game also made clever use of verticality, with multi-story buildings, air ducts, and underwater sections adding layers of complexity to navigation. If there's one area where the gameplay falters, it's in the occasional reliance on keycards and backtracking, which could sometimes feel like padding rather than meaningful exploration. However, these moments are few and far between, and the game's charm, variety, and unrelenting action more than make up for it. In the end, Duke Nukem 3D's gameplay is a masterclass in combining old-school FPS mechanics with innovative ideas that push the genre forward. It's loud, messy, and unapologetically over the top. The perfect playground for gamers who wanted action, humor, and a little bit of chaos, all rolled into one. Duke Nukem 3D was a technical marvel when it launched in 1996, showcasing what the build engine could achieve while delivering visuals and sound that perfectly matched its over-the-top personality. Visually, Duke Nukem 3D employed the build engine to create a mix of 2D sprites and 3D environments, a hallmark of many games of its era. What made Duke Nukem 3D stand out wasn't just the technology, it was how that technology was used. Levels were vibrant, detailed, and packed with interactive objects that brought the world to life. Whether you were walking through the flickering neon streets of LA or creeping through a darkened space station, each location was drenched in atmosphere. Unlike the abstract corridors of Doom, Duke Nukem 3D presented familiar, grounded locations like theaters, strip clubs, and diners. These weren't just eye candy, they helped players feel like they were battling aliens in a recognizable world. The ability to interact with mirrors, pool tables, and light switches also added a sense of realism, even if it was wrapped in a chaotic, pixelated package. Of course, the game wasn't without its graphical limitations. Characters and enemies were presented as 2D sprites, which often appeared flat and could become distorted when viewed at certain angles. While this was a common issue in the era, the sheer variety and creativity of the enemy designs helped make up for it. If the visuals gave Duke Nukem 3D its personality, the sound design turned that personality up to 11. Duke himself, voiced by John St. John, delivered some of the most iconic one-liners in gaming history. From his Schwarzenegger-inspired quips to his sarcastic jabs at defeated enemies, Duke's voice work added humor and character to the entire experience. The soundtrack complemented the game's high-energy action with tracks that mixed heavy metal riffs and eerie synth melodies. Each level had its own unique music, perfectly matching its theme and pacing. Sound effects were equally impactful. Guns packed a satisfying punch, with the shotgun delivering a deep, booming blast that made it a favorite among players. Explosions roared with satisfying ferocity, while alien enemies screeched and groaned as they fell in battle. Even the environmental sounds, like the hum of machinery or the clinking of Duke's boots on metallic floors, added layers of immersion. Then there were the smaller details that elevated the audio experience. The sound of water splashing as Duke waded through a pool, the buzz of neon lights, or the crackle of a radio in the background. All these touches worked together to make the game world feel alive and responsive. Duke Nukem 3D isn't just remembered as a great game, it's a cultural icon of the 1990s, forever etched into the annals of gaming history. Few games of its era captured the zeitgeist quite like Duke's alien-busting, wisecracking escapades, blending innovative gameplay with an irreverent sense of humor that pushed the boundaries of what video games could be. While its influence on the industry is undeniable, its legacy is a mixed bag of triumphs, controversies, and what-ifs. At its core, Duke Nukem 3D expanded the horizons of the first-person shooter genre, which was still evolving in the mid-90s. Games like Doom and Wolfenstein 3D had established the formula, but Duke Nukem 3D added layers of interactivity, humor, and personality that were virtually unheard of at the time. The game also carved out a niche for itself as a thinking man's shooter, where players had to rely on more than just twitch reflexes to survive. Whether it was setting traps with trip mines, strategically shrinking enemies with the shrink ray, or using the jetpack to outmaneuver foes. Much of Duke Nukem 3D's enduring popularity can be traced back to its title character. Duke Nukem was the embodiment of 90s anti-heroes, a mashup of action movie stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, and Clint Eastwood. His over-the-top machismo and endless stream of one-liners turned him into an icon, making him a mascot not just for the game but for an era of gaming that reveled in excess and rebelliousness. Of course, Duke Nukem 3D wasn't without its detractors. Its crude humor, violent content, and depictions of sexuality made it a lightning rod for controversy, especially during the height of the video games cause violence debate. The game was banned in several countries, and its portrayal of women, often scantily clad, objectified, or victimized, sparked criticism that lingers to this day. While these controversies helped cement its reputation as a boundary pusher, they also raised questions about the limits of humor and shock value in gaming. For some, the game's unapologetic attitude was a breath of fresh air. For others, it marked a low point in how games could portray sensitive subjects. Duke Nukem 3D set the bar high for its franchise, but its legacy is also marked by its successor's struggles to live up to it. Duke Nukem Forever, the long-awaited sequel, became infamous for its protracted development cycle and lackluster reception. By the time it was released in 2011, 15 years after Duke Nukem 3D, the gaming landscape had shifted, and Duke's brand of humor and gameplay felt outdated. At its best, Duke Nukem 3D is a time capsule of gaming in the mid-90s. A bold, brash, and wildly creative title that dared to do things differently. Its flaws, whether in taste or technology, are part of its charm, serving as a reminder of how far games have come and how much fun they can be when they embrace the absurd. For those who played it back in the day, Duke Nukem 3D is a nostalgia-fueled reminder of a time when games didn't take themselves too seriously. For newer players, it's a masterclass in old-school FPS design, showcasing the DNA of a genre that continues to dominate the industry. Love it or hate it, there's no denying that Duke left his mark on gaming history, cigar, sunglasses, and all.